So, welcome to Team Emotional Intelligence, the podcast where 1 + 1 makes 3. Today, we have the pleasure to have with us Steven Wolff. Steven Wolff is a pioneer of Team Emotional Intelligence, the co-author of the seminal article of 2001 about how to create an emotional intelligence group, and an expert in team dynamics. So, not last but not least, board member of the European Center for Team Emotional Intelligence. And I'm honored and glad you have decided to be with us. So, first of all, thank you, Steve.
Oh, you're so welcome. My pleasure.
So, this evening we are going, or this morning, considering the different time zone in this episode, we would like to go a little bit through your origin story, how you arrived to teamwork and team dynamics and so on. We are curious.
So, well, my origin story is quite winding and complex, actually.
Okay.
So I started out my career as an electrical engineer, designing computers. So I have a technical background, and it was in that experience that got me interested in leadership and culture and teams. So in 2000, or 1980, the end of the 1980s, I got laid off from my job designing computers. It was sort of the beginning of the end of the mini computer industry. And I decided to go for my doctorate in business because I was really quite interested in leadership and teams at that point. And that's what I did. And so I did my dissertation on teams.
So first of all, we have to say thank you for the layoff. Otherwise, probably
Indeed.
the risk is to see you on computers and so on, and maybe an amazing career in that field. But fortunately, you have decided to take your PhD and look at the team, but with the perspective of an engineer. And that's quite interesting.
Yes, and it turns out actually quite important in the work that I do and in understanding teams, which I can tell you about if you want.
Yeah, please go. It's interesting.
So how does being an engineer relate to the work I am doing with teams? And it's interesting because as a doctoral student, and I was studying teams, and I remember this very vividly. I was sitting in the library, in my Carrel in the library. I was reading all this stuff on teams, and it was just really agitating me, actually, because it seemed so surface level. It's like people would say, well, you need to have trust. And I would say, okay, so is there some fairy dust I can sprinkle on the team members to generate trust? Or
do we have a pill?
Yeah. Yeah, do you have a pill? I mean, what's the deal? And I was looking through the library, just roaming the bookshelves, and something stood out for me that I think only a technical person would have even thought to pick up. And it was an article in a book by a physicist, and it was called Unifying Principles of Evolution from Physical Systems to Social Systems. And it was pretty technical, but I picked it up, and that actually turns out to be the foundation of my work. And it introduced me to complex adaptive systems. And what I quickly came to understand is teams are complex adaptive systems. And complex adaptive systems, they operate with a set of principles and a set of rules. And those are actually, that's what this article was about. There are unified principles that you can apply that apply to physical systems and social systems. And I thought, well, if they're that universal, there must be something there. And that started me on the path to really understanding the deep workings of a team, because what you see on the surface really is a manifestation of a lot of forces beneath the surface. And if you work just on what's on the surface, it's like putting band-aids on a hemophiliac, right? The energy that's driving those patterns is still there, and so they just keep popping up. So anyway, so that's just a little bit of why being an engineer is important.
Yeah, because only you or a person with your technical background could have seen in that obscure article something really interesting. Because, as usual, innovation is really sometimes something that you see but others don't see, because what you perceived is different from the other perceptions and so on. And it's curious that what really intrigued you maybe was under the eyes of lots of other people, and no one says, oh, that could be interesting. And so, I mean, by the way, teaching at the Faculty of Management Engineering here in Bologna, I know how important it is to start with the mechanism, the brain, and so on, the system, because, of course, technical people needs to understand and really to go in deep, because there's not just to say, well, let's try to create trust. What does it mean? How is the mechanism? So you got interested in teams and complex systems, and then your dissertation was about teamwork.
It was about caring behavior and teamwork. Yes.
Okay. When you really go through the idea of team emotional intelligence or group emotional intelligence, considering that at the time it seemed to me that it was the name.
Yes, it was called initially group emotional competence, I think.
Okay.
But now we call it team emotional intelligence.
Of course. And what was the spark to go there?
So the spark, so Vanessa was a fellow doctoral student at Boston University, and we were both studying teams. And so we got to know each other. She lived right here in the neighborhood, next town over. And so she graduated before I did. She went out to Case Western Reserve, and she was in the organizational behavior department with Richard Boyatzis, who is a partner and colleague with Dan Goleman.
Yep.
And Dan had just written his initial book on emotional intelligence a couple of years earlier, and he was looking to write a second book. He was in the process of it, and they asked Vanessa, "Well, would you like to write a chapter on emotional intelligence at the team level?" And so she said yes. And then she called me and said, "Hey, you want to work on this with me?" And my family was out in Cleveland, so I went out to Cleveland for the summer, had a place to stay for the whole summer. My family, it was awesome. And we would get together at her office every day or every few days over the summer to put this theory together for Dan's book. And that's essentially how it started.
So we have to say thanks to Dan Goleman, even for the team emotional intelligence, not only for this seminal book of 1995, Emotional Intelligence, but he pushed the process to have this kind of theory. So
yes,
very well done. Another point scored by Dan Goleman. And then how you arrived to the article that on the Harvard Business Review?
So, um, so we had put together theory and actually started doing some research on it. So one of the initial pieces of research that we did was at Johnson and Johnson, and we were working with internal consultants, really awesome colleagues as well, on testing team emotional intelligence at J&J. And so so that's the initial work we did. And then we said, well, we need to write an article on this because, it was turning out to be quite powerful. And in some ways, I want to say mysterious. That may not be the right word, but there were, and the word that I use, which I don't use a lot as an engineer, was magical things were happening, right? So some of the teams that we were working with, they had conflict and everything, and we gave them the survey and we gave them the data and worked with them a little bit. And it's like those conflicts just kind of melted away. And that's happened over and over again. So, and not just with conflict, but with dysfunctional behaviors and a lot of bad surface level patterns of behavior. And so that was the impetus for, wanting to write an article. And then, of course, we're a little bit fortunate because Dan Goleman was on our side. And so he, of course, had been publishing in HBR and said, hey, you might be interested in these guys. Yeah. And they were.
Why not?
And the rest is history,
Yeah. So. In this case, the expression, the rest is history, is really important because I don't know how many reprints you had about the article, but really it's an incredible success. And the point for me that was so interesting when for the first time I encountered this idea of team emotional intelligence was that, of course, when you wrote about that, we were aware of the mechanism of the brain described by Dan in the article, so amygdala and so on. And you applied the knowledge in the field of organizational behavior to the idea of emotional intelligence in teams. Mm-hmm. And then you go on the field in order to get data and try to find a way to really say if it works or not. So there were knowledge in terms of neuroscience, organizational behavior, emotional intelligence, but you go there on the field with Johnson & Johnson and not only, but in order to see if these things were really applicable and meaningful. And it's not so easy to find right now because sometimes there's a theory I try to apply, I have a theoretical model that could be fascinating, but you did it differently.
Yeah, so I suppose that's another advantage to being an engineer. First of all, I'm very skeptical. And so the fact that I came up with something, I mean, really has very little meaning to me. I don't know if it works or not, but as an engineer, I want to know if it works or not, right? And so, that led us to want to do some of the validation studies that we did. And in one of the studies, what we found was, and this is statistically valid, a statistical finding, is that teams higher in team emotional intelligence actually have 25% greater performance. That's the way we talk about it. It's really, R squared related to the dependent variable of performance is 25%. But in lay language, it improves.
That's so good for an engineer. You need to talk about R squared. I mean, it's needed.
Yeah. So I mean, if there's some technical people there, they'll know that saying it's 25% greater performance is not 100% the accurate way to put it, but for all the rest of the people,
It's good.
it's good enough.
And it's based on numbers and research.
It's based
and
on numbers. Yeah, we have
yeah.
the data to show that. Indeed.
Incredible to see the impact of the fundamentals in a team. So you have found something that without it's impossible to be an high performing team. So it's not a magic or a secret recipe, but I mean, numbers said that you need to have in place some fundamentals in order to have norms that permits you to arrive to a social capital that increase the probability to be an high performing team.
Yeah, absolutely. So all of the norms that are in that model are verified through the research. So if you look at the HBR article, the norms that are in there, you'll see are different than the final model because we kept refining it as we got more and more and more data. And so there's now 9 norms, but the interesting thing is when we did the research, we didn't want to just know, are these norms connected to the outcome? We wanted to know how important they are compared to everything else that could be affecting team performance. So in the research, what we did was essentially we threw everything in, including the kitchen sink and team emotional intelligence as the independent variables. And we had a lot of them. We actually asked people inside the organization, well, what do you think makes your teams really effective? We asked the internal consultants, okay? And we put everything that we could measure into the research. And then when we analyze it, and this just totally blows me away. I mean, this was not the intent. We analyzed it, and the only things that came out was team emotional intelligence. The 3 factors of team emotional intelligence, the individual, team, and cross-boundary levels. And one other thing, which is why it's in our survey, and those are the fundamentals. So we didn't have goals and roles and responsibilities and meetings and stuff like that in our team emotional intelligence model. Those were some of the variables in the research. And when we did the analysis, those 3 things came out also as important. And so we decided to stick them into the survey and the assessment because we wanted to be complete. And as it turns out, you don't really get to be super high performing and emotionally intelligent if the fundamentals are not in place. Those are actually really critical, which is another reason that we put them in there. But once those are in place, now you can take the insights from team emotional intelligence and use it to move to the next level.
Well, it's really fascinating. And I mean, could we say that you and Vanessa were an incredible team? So the social psychologist, the engineer, different perspective, numbers, insights put together, really 1 + 1 makes 3 in your case.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we couldn't have done this without each other. There's no way that I'd be where I am today and we'd have developed what we developed without Vanessa. And I like to think without me.
Yep.
because I mean, I bring the technical side and the understanding of the systems side to it. So yeah, and I will say, um, it wasn't always easy. And one of the things that I've learned through the years, and I have another awesome colleague that I'm working with today, um, and we are also very, very different. So Vanessa and I were very different. This
Yep.
colleague and I are very different. And it's difficult. It's difficult getting the synergy out of two different perspectives. And that's where the team emotional intelligence really is important. And so we tend to practice what we preach. Doesn't mean that the difficulty is not going to be there. It just means that we know how to get through it to the other side with something that's synergy between us. And that's what happened with Vanessa and I. That's what's happening with my colleague and I. And in that process, as I've reflected on it, there's a lot of lessons that we're incorporating now to help people.
Yeah. Before going there, let me just add one little piece. I mean, I know both of you, you and Vanessa, and what impressed me is the level of differences, but at the same time, the huge level of respect you have for each other. And that's really amazing to see this kind of relation you kept in more than 20 years with an incredible and probably uh, not easy to repeat level of respect for the other person and the work of the other person. It's really amazing. And by the way, it's not easy. It's something that you have to build. And I've seen you both have built this kind of respect, this kind of really relation. And it's amazing to see because you are always in the position of the understatement, and we have seen it even in this episode where you say, yeah, probably a small piece. I mean, you have revolutionized the way we see teams. And what is really impressive to me is that after 20 years, we see lots of researchers that look at organization only considering individuals and create averages or sum of individuals. And so you look at the individual, you look at the organization, but there's still a missing link and is at the team level. And you wrote about that, you researched about that with data more than 20 years ago. How is it possible?
Yeah, well, it's possible because I read that article, basically. No, seriously, because one of my biggest frustrations, it's hard for people to understand the concepts. They are technical. They are not intuitive. And so, um, you know, one of the clients that I'm working with, had an issue. And what I said to that client before I started working with them, and fortunately they trusted that I knew what I was doing, I said, you know what? I'm going to solve that issue, but I'm not working on it for 10 seconds. That issue is an outcome, and you need to work on the underlying drivers of that outcome in order for it to go away. And that's the work that we do, but it's frustrating because it's not common sense. People don't quite understand it. And if somebody's acting up, another client, for example, dysfunctional member, what do they do? What they do is, okay, we need to pull this person out. We need to have a review of them, give them a plan, whatever, whatever, whatever. And things don't really change because the underlying energy is still there. And if that person changes a little bit, the underlying energy will cause somebody else to now all of a sudden be dysfunctional. But it's really hard. But it's very rewarding when you do, because you, like I said, I use the term magical, which as an engineer and a very, very methodical person, that doesn't come easy, but most like these things just melt away. It's incredible.
Well, let me say, especially for your reputation as engineer, that you have decoded the magic, because you talk about magic, but in your practice, there's a clear way to arrive from the as is to the to be. So at the end is magic, because people see that 1 + 1 makes 3, but this difference is based on science, research, and so on. So it's magical, but you have the magic formula, probably. You, Vanessa, and all the people
Yeah.
around that have really understood that if we want to see results in a team, we need to consider team as an organism with some hidden forces and so on, but in some way you decoded it. And now, thanks to you, we have a model with practical tips and things to do, the norms, how to. And so it's amazing to see how research and science could be transformed in practical things. And it was one of the dialogue we had months ago. It's not so difficult. I mean, there's a lots of efforts, but if you go in deep, it's not so difficult, because it's about belonging. It's about perceived as a part of, perceived as important.
Yeah. And let me just give you a little tiny example, personal example. When you say it's not difficult, I want to just explain how one of my bosses, a simple 5-second thing that she did made a huge, huge difference to me, and still does, and connected me to her. And that has to do with caring. That was my dissertation, as I mentioned, right? And so this was an act of caring. And so I'm hopelessly organizationally unaware. So I was working in the organization. I couldn't tell you who the president was. I didn't care who the president was. Okay. I don't advocate this for anybody, but that's just who I was. My boss recognized that. And instead of her pulling me out, so to speak, and telling me you need to be more aware and you need to learn these things, and she didn't do that. What she did was, at a meeting, if somebody mentioned the name Joe Smith, who happened to be the CEO, and they said Joe Smith, she would pause for a second and parenthetically put in our CEO, and then let the conversation continue. That small act had a profound difference on me. It doesn't take a tremendous amount. You just need to know where to focus your attention and what to do. And I just want to react to one word that you use, which is, we've got the formula. There is no formula. Okay, so every team is different. And so to the extent that there's a formula for example, um, you might call the norms a formula, but they're not. They're a place to focus attention. And so, for example, caring is one of those norms.
Mm-hmm.
But how that shows up in every team is going to be different. And so part of the trick is not to make it a formula other than to focus attention
Yeah.
and awareness and make it appropriate for that combination of people. So,
Yes. Let me say, I will not repeat anymore the word formula. So you're right. I mean, I was thinking about the norms. So a journey, a path that permit us to know where we have to focus our attention. But what you say is even more important because we know that all teams are different, and this kind of difference is included in the 9 norms and the fundamentals. So even if we are different and we work in different contexts, we have a way to go through team performance that is studied and was really researched and so on. So that's the really incredible impact of team emotional intelligence in the business community, but not only in the business community, because it's the same for schools and so on. So all kind of organization. So let me say that unfortunately, we are at the conclusion of our episode. I would go ahead for 3 hours more, and probably we will need to ask you to join once again in order to have another episode. But let me just say from the heart how grateful I am for your participation here today, but also to be part of our board at the European Center of Team Emotional Intelligence, because we really, in a so complex world, we need more collaboration, and we have some insights that we need to use in 2025. We need to use it. So thank you, thank you, thank you, Steve. And I need to close our episode saying, from Team Emotional Intelligence, the podcast where 1+1 makes 3, a big hug to everybody. Here we are. Thank you, Steve, really, for your participation.
You're welcome. My pleasure.